Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm giving my first impressions of Threshold from Open Owl Studios. And this very much will be a first impressions today for a variety of reasons. First of all, the usual prototype, all rules, components, subject to change, speaking of which, I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. But usually the distinguishing factor for me between first impressions and a review is either if I don't feel there was enough content to really get a good impression of the game. Very often in prototypes that can happen. Sometimes they give you a single mission and you're expected to know more about what the game has, and I just don't necessarily want to give a full opinion when there's not enough content. That's not the case today. The case today specifically is that there's a lot. We'll get into what the game does, we'll get into how it operates. There's a lot that I really enjoy about Threshold. But there's also things that get in the way of the experience for me right now, and I think a lot of those things do come down to the prototype and where it's at, and I'm hoping the final version will address those in many ways, so I don't feel comfortable reviewing it too negatively based on the prototype. It's not too negative, to be clear. I don't feel comfortable being too harsh because of the prototype, but I also don't feel comfortable being too positive with the expectation that things will change. This is a little bit of a precursor, but it's a first impressions. It's a first impressions. Let's talk to you about what the game is doing, how it generally operates, and then I'll go into all the things I like, as well as my current hesitations with where it is today. So, what is Threshold? At its core, Threshold is trying to replicate the MMORPG experience, the massive multiplayer online role-playing game. If you've played games like, I guess World of Warcraft is going to be the most popular. Guild Wars is where I personally have a soft spot. There's a lot of MMORPGs out there, although I will say the heyday of them has kind of moved on. Once upon a time, there was like a battle to be the next World of Warcraft, and many things fought. And, let's not do a deep dive into MMORPGs. Threshold is trying to replicate the MMORPG experience, but in tabletop form, giving you that open-world feeling. You are a character. Your goal is to go out and adventure. You have quests. There's quests in the game. There's things that will drive you forward. Could you wander around just hacking and slashing various things in order to slowly upgrade yourself? Absolutely you can. But more often when you play an MMORPG, or when you play Threshold, your goal is to look at the current quest options in front of you. You're going to have main quests, you're going to have side quests. There's just different things you're trying to do. And then your goal is to accomplish those quests, fighting various enemies along the way, sometimes doing things like more pick up and deliver, but just basically trying to accomplish the goals of the game, of the quests, to drive forward towards the next quest. Along the way, you're hopefully powering up, but along the way, so are the enemies. The enemies are powering up, you're getting stronger. You die in combat, no problem. You respawn and try again, slowly adding experience points that you can power up, so you can match the power creep of wherever you are in the game. There is no losing in a typical sense, there's just not currently being able to get past the current objective, until you power up a little better, go back into the combat a bit more refreshed. If you've played an MMORPG, that's what Threshold is trying to do. The way it does this is you have the overland map over here. This is one of the regions in the game. I don't fully know all the prototype content versus the full-on content. You can check out the campaign page. Again, I'll link to that down below. But this is the core region we're starting in over here. You have your character, which has a current miniature over here. You could play multiplayer or you could play it solo, having multiple characters exploring this overland map as you wander around from locations. You're going to have these quests. These quests are going to give you things, and I've tried to reset the game. I think I've reset the game mostly to where the starting tutorial kind of guides you through over here, although a little different. Technically, these mobs aren't yet on the board, but we'll get to that. But either way, you have your character, you have your quests. These are going to be your main quests. You also have your kind of side load adventures. That's going to be these over here. And again, this tray is designed to be matching the region, so you can kind of have a region tray storing and saving everything you need for easy accessibility. These are going to give you what it is you're trying to do, where it is you're trying to go. We have to actually, I believe, I did not flip these back over here. These are supposed to be on these side. I did not flip these various quests back, I apologize. But you have the various quests giving you a general idea. There's pie delivery and there's home invasion. Different things that you can try to work towards as you accomplish these initial quests. Then you have these cards, which you'll have opportunities to get your hands on them, again, giving you little adventures that you're also trying to do as you go through it. All of these kind of give you your main quests and your side quests. You can see over here that we're trying to resolve the home invasion. Let's put this token over here. We have a token over here for the home invasion. Let's just put this one as our current quest. And you're trying to make your way over here in order to resolve this quest. And when you get here, you can then engage to defend Hearthstead from monsters. Different quests have different types. Engage means it's going to be a combat quest, which means once you get there, you're going to look at the quest booklet and then set up a little sideboard. There are different sideboards over here, giving you different options as far as different maps that you have. For example, we have this one, we have double-sided maps, giving you small adjustments to the different sideboards you'll have as you set up with a bunch of enemies. I'm just going to choose a few random ones over here, and then you'll go ahead and dive into combat, moving your character into that combat in order to fight the various enemies. So that's the kind of general arc. You have a quest, you have an overland board. When you get to a fight, you go into this little mini combat area, and then you try to resolve that fight, either dying or winning, and then move on to the next thing. Constantly trying to manage your hand, your wounds, your fatigue, all of these different stats to ensure that you're moving forward while being presented with challenges. Speaking of which, the main mechanic of the game is going to be your hand. You have your hand of cards. Your hand of cards represents everything you can do. This represents all your options. You can discard cards to move around the overland board. So for example, over here, if I wanted to move from here to here, I'd have to discard 2 cards because there's not a road between these spots. So I discard 2. Actually, I can't even move there. I can't. There's a river over here. Give me 1 second. Let's start from the beginning. If I'm over here, I can discard a single card in order to move along the road. Then I can discard another card in order to move over here, and another card to go here. And then over here, if I wanted to go here, I could discard 2 cards to cross where there isn't a road. Although I don't necessarily need to do that, because when I'm over here, I can dive into combat. In combat, you'll also be discarding cards. You'll discard cards in order to move from location to location, although sometimes you'll have abilities on those cards. For example, I could instead play Dash, which costs 0 other cards. Very often cards have a cost in them, meaning you need to discard cards to pay for cards. Again, cards are your currency. Cards pay for everything in the game. So you can discard a card to move, or you can play an action card in order to move, moving around to be able to engage with these various enemies. Then you can go ahead and play your other cards to deal damage to them, sometimes requiring other cards to power them up to be able to slowly deal damage to take them down, understanding though that these enemies are also going to have their own little enemy deck. You'll be setting up these various sideboards for the various enemies as you dive into combats. These give you the enemies, their stats, where you can put shields, all the various abilities, how much health, how much damage, how much defense, how much movement they have. You're also going to have the various cards that they're bringing to combat, and that's going to be the actions they're going to play as you resolve their actions. You'll have a sense over time as you confront various enemies, and this is no different than a regular MMORPG. As you have different enemy types that you get familiar with and you get used to, you'll be able to understand a bit more how they operate. So the first time you face off with an enemy, you may not be as well equipped to deal with them, but over time, you learn that that enemy is going to be a little weaker if I'm able to close the gap and get right next to it. That enemy's probably setting themselves up for a block right now, and you start to know their cards and their patterns, and you get stronger, not just through your own experience in the way you level up your actual cards and your deck in the game, but even just through knowing the various enemies you're facing off against. Again, your cards are everything. As you shuffle your deck, you're slowly going to increase fatigue, and this over here, this marker between your health and fatigue, when your health crosses your fatigue, that's when you take a wound. So the longer you go on with a deck that is constantly being shuffled, the higher your fatigue will increase and the less it takes to deal with a wound, which means you're frequently going to need to go back to towns and rest. You're going to want to rest, you're going to want to upgrade. A big part of the game is going to be these various skill lines. There's a lot of skill lines over here in the game. Over here I have my core deck for this particular character. That's going to be their particular deck that they're going to build on based on your guard. For example, over here I have a Guardian. As the Guardian increases their skill points, the level, they'll be able to invest more points into different cards, stronger cards or more cards or both, that will go into their deck, powering up what they can do or even just how big their deck is. We'll also be gathering equipment. As you face off against enemies, as you accomplish goals of quests, you're going to get rewards, and those rewards will often come in the way of dice, and dice will often have different stats to them. If I roll this die over here, I can go ahead, well, hopefully let's re-roll that over there. I get an uncommon item. Uncommon items are incredibly fun. Common items are pretty decent. They're good overall, but uncommon items, that's where the real fun lies in, and rare items is even more so. We start getting even cooler things, being able to add more stuff that you could tap this to be able to move one, but it's also going to give you a skill point in pyromancy, which means my blade slinging Guardian over here suddenly can go ahead and add a flame sling over here. I unintentionally said blade slinging and added a flame sling. Now that I have a point in pyromancy, I can add flame sling to my deck, so I'm slowly hacking and slashing the enemies while also casting the occasional fireball at distant enemies. You have different options. You have all these skill lines over here, lots of skill lines where you can slowly augment and build your character in different directions through their own individual class tree, as well as all these various ways you can add points to their build, speccing them out in different ways. Again, this is an MMORPG. You are your character. You have all these items. You have all these spells. You have all these abilities. You have all these ways to build your character based on either your preferred playstyle or the various items you've gotten, or usually a combination of both, because you can only hold on to so many items at once, which means you do need to pick and choose how you're going to utilize these items towards your own preferred playstyle. I think that's a good general overview of what Threshold is doing. You're going to continue this progression, going through these quests, going through these side quests, powering up, dealing with stronger enemies, until you get to the conclusion of the particular realm you're in, the particular quest line you're facing, but then you have these different realms you can go through, which is why it's an MMORPG. Wander around, explore, deal with the land. You're going to have roaming mobs that there's going to be a timing mechanism because time does not stand still. That's why you have this action economy where you spend cards, because as you do so, as you spend your hand, the enemies are going to start moving around the board as well. Little roaming mobs are going to be moving, getting in your way, forcing you to engage with various random combats that will give you some degree of rewards, but also represent, again, if you've played an MMORPG, just because you're going to go ahead and deliver that crucible sword to the, the blacksmith's daughter who needed it from her father way back when. I have no clue. Whatever quest line you're in an MMORPG, but as you're doing so, you might have a roaming mob of goblins that gets in your way that isn't part of the quest, but it's just enemies you need to face off against because that's how these things work. That's what Threshold is. Threshold is an MMORPG in tabletop form, attempting to mimic the best parts of an MMORPG experience while making it tabletop friendly, which is where my review starts to come in. How do I feel about Threshold? Let's start with the good. There's a lot here that I enjoy, and I will say, I've never played World of Warcraft, but I loved Guild Wars. I loved the original Guild Wars. I played a lot of Guild Wars 2. I didn't love it quite as much, but I love the sense of an open world experience. I like the feeling that it's not about defeat. I don't mind a game. I don't mind winning or losing as a general, meaning I don't want a game which you can never have adversarial content, if that makes sense. I want something that challenges me, but what that challenge looks like is different. I don't need to die in a game. I'm okay with the fact that I died in the combat, so I need to power up, get stronger, and get back into it. I don't mind that. Learn the characters, learn the enemies a bit more, respec my deck a bit more to deal with that particular thing. I like that overall experience, and Threshold does a pretty good job capturing some of the high fun moments because of the deck building nature of it. Because you have your own particular class line. In this particular prototype, we only had 2, but you have your particular class line you're diving into, and so you can spec out your class line, making them stronger and more powerful. The way you can gather additional cards and start building out a combination of talents and skills, it really starts to make you feel very cool when you start the game off with like, oh, I deal 3 damage by discarding a card and I'm getting nothing done. And then by the time you're a few hours into the game, you're suddenly being able to tap various pieces of equipment, being able to get extra movement, draw extra cards, and then have these cool epic turns where you feel like a monster. You feel like you can get a lot done, but granted, the enemies are stronger too. In order to feel more powerful, more accomplished, you can't just be hitting these 1 health guys. There's no 1 health guys, there's like 8 health guys. You can't just be hitting these small little peons. You need to be facing off against stronger enemies. And Threshold does a great job at giving you that power creep, that escalation. It gives you a great job at that sense of finding cool items, starting off with commons and uncommons and rare, giving a degree of power creep to the items you get to be able to feel more powerful. But even as you find cool items, that's not necessarily enough, because just because you have a few points in pyromancy and a few points in conjuration, sometimes you want to really lean into pyromancy. So there's still that sense of, just because I have all the uncommon or all the rares, I still want a particular set of things to be able to spec out my character in a certain direction. And so it has that sense of getting fun things, of getting cool things, of finding more cool things, of wanting to continue to seek out until you have that perfect build. Although, as with any MMORPG, if you ever do actually achieve a perfect build, then some of the fun wears off because the pursuit part of it is done. I haven't gotten that far yet, so I'm still in the chasing phase, so the chasing phase is still fun. The chasing phase of being able to find the cards. Like, there are so many cards here to go through, so many abilities. I've gone through a handful of them, relatively speaking, to the sheer amount of things there are, and even that handful has allowed me to feel very cool in combination of my class, a few different abilities, and being able to get a lot more done. So that overall sense of a reason you're doing things, you're moving around the world, you're trying to accomplish this quest, you have these side adventures, you have these fights and these combats and this cool way you build your character, you have that sense of exploration and finding new items. All of that Threshold does amazingly well and gives me a very fun time feeling like a cool character able to do cool things. I will say that as far as the combat part of things, well, let's talk about solo versus co-op soon. That's more complicated. Solo versus co-op, because I play this 1-player and 2-player, and I have thoughts on it that are a little more complicated because I like parts of both, but I also don't like parts of both. We'll get to that in a second. So overall, the feeling of an MMORPG, the highlights are there, the overall sense of exploration, cool combos, and finding new stuff, all of that is present. Where Threshold doesn't work as well for me, and some of these things might change, some of these things might not change. I don't have a good full sense of it quite yet. First of all, I'll say the sense of the random mobs, okay? We're going to dive into different things, and I'll give you my thoughts on each of them, because Some of them I expect are, let's start with things I expect are prototype issues, and then from there move into the things that are just things I don't like about the nature of trying to incorporate a MMORPG into a tabletop form, and how some things just don't work as well for me. So starting off with the prototype issues, number one, this display of cards needs some sort of setup or something. Like, there's too much setup. Like, the Threshold pitches the idea that you can play it for 15 minutes or you can play it for 3 hours, whatever degree of time you want. The problem is right now it's easily 15 minutes to set up and or tear down because there's just lots of decks going on. The actual core boards, like this over here, this pulls out incredibly quickly, so it's very easy to pull that out. I will say, by the way, again, some prototype issues, I'm not using the proper character boards because there's some issues with how well your board overlays onto it, but there are other sets for that, tracking your experience, tracking your gear, your stuff. So some things I'm not using from a prototype stance, but that's a different kind of issue. But overall, this needs to be, in order to be a game that is actually played in like 20-minute sessions as opposed to only ever playing when I have 3 hours, this needs to be a game that I can set up in 2 to 3 minutes and put away in 2 to 3 minutes. And supposedly, from talking to Open Owl Studios, that is the goal and the intent. This is just a prototype, so some things are done, some things aren't. But that's a big difference as far as the accessibility of this kind of experience. How well does this game save everything? Can I jump into this game for 15 minutes at a time? Can I jump into this game for 3 hours at a time? Can I come back to this game after 2 months of not playing it? And do I have to relearn and figure out where things are? Or does the game save the state for you properly? One of my biggest challenges with campaign game experiences, with games that give you a long arc, is can I show back up after not playing it for 2 months and I don't have to do anything else? And the general simplicity of how Threshold operates, general simplicity, we're going to come back to that in a second, the general simplicity of it makes me feel that the rules wouldn't be that big of a challenge, because everything just comes down to you have your cards, you spend your cards to do stuff, and then everything else is kind of saved in this tray and just drives you forward. I feel like the core rule set here is very straightforward, that from a rule remembering part, I can come back 2 months later without having played it. And then the question is, from a setup part, does the game state really remember exactly where I was up to, where I can just dive back into it without having to figure it out? One of the main advantages video games have over board games when you have these giant epic experiences is if I don't play a game on my PlayStation for 3 months and I pop back into it, the game just shoots me exactly where I was. I don't have to figure anything out. I don't have to remember. I don't have to figure out where I put my decks or my cards or what skill stats I had or look at a sheet. It's all done for you. And games try to do that to a different degree. Board games try to do that to a different degree, but for me personally, none have truly captured that simplicity of diving back into an experience. Threshold is trying to, but prototype. So I don't fully know exactly where that is. The other prototype issue is the core rules are very straightforward. The core rules are very, very simple, very straightforward, but there's a lot of small things that are not as straightforward. There's a lot of small little quirks as far as how things operate, a lot of edge cases, and I don't know if there's a way to streamline those out or not. Some of those come down to even just the way the game works with one player versus two, and the rules differences you're going to have when you have two different people wandering around the board doing their own thing, popping into combat. There's a lot of small edge cases, and if they can find a way to capture all of those core edge case experiences on, maybe it's just an issue of player aids. Maybe you need a player aid for setting up combat, a player aid for second players doing this thing, a player aid for upgrading your character. You might need small, isolated little just cards that give you the core rules for all these small things that get in the way of the experience. Because again, the core rule set of Threshold was so straightforward. But all the edge cases definitely made it a little bit more, what am I doing, how am I doing it, and those things get in the way of the accessibility of the experience. I think this game, with a handful of decent, take these quest cards over here, a handful of decent full-size index cards with rules for specific situations, yes, have a rule book, absolutely. There's also a learn to play, a guiding experience. But I think it can really benefit from a few index cards that give you the different rule sets for different things, and all the small intricacies that get in the way of an incredibly smooth experience. That's going to be the other prototype issue. Outside of that, I don't love roaming mobs. This is an issue I faced off against in many, many board games. Many board games that try to adapt a video game type of experience to a board game form often have some sort of grind in them. Video games do give you grind, absolutely they do, but I personally find that grind in video games is usually more palatable to the players than grind in board games. That's a personal judgment call based on what I've seen so far, but some of it's just even just the nature of hacking a bunch of buttons as you go into like this cool combat thing, where even just the process of doing the exact same combat. I'm in the middle of playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I've been in the middle of it for months, going back to my point, but I'm in the middle of playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey and diving into just another fight is still satisfying because it feels cool to mash those buttons in the exact same pattern that I just did 2 minutes ago. There's something about the nature of a video game that gives you those repeated grind experiences don't feel as grindy. It feels like another execution of, look how cool I am, look at me take down a bunch of enemies the exact same way I did it 3 minutes ago. I don't find that's true in tabletop, at least not in most of the tabletop experiences I've played. I don't find that sense of accomplishment of being able to, like, look, I'm going to go ahead and play these cards, and I'm going to play my card, I'm going to play Swordcraft, and I'm going to deal 2 damage to each enemy, and then I'm going to play that. That often has much more of a degree of grind. I find grind in board games is just more grindy and less satisfying, and I understand why it sometimes needs to be in place. If nothing else, it needs to be a timer forcing you around the board, but I find that the roaming mobs and threshold, to me, just get in the way of my experience. So, and many games have given you that grind, and then based on user feedback over time, adjusted that grind to be like, oh, here's ways to like house rule past it. And I don't know if there's a magical solution here, but what I'll say is the roaming mobs are not the end of the world. For me personally, I'd be looking forward to the magical solution that lets you just skip them. When you deal with a roaming mob, you have to encounter it for the first time. Something like Isofair Guard did, for example, is the first time you encountered each enemy was one thing, and then they gave you a way to kind of skip past enemies you've encountered before. So, oh, you've encountered a level 3 roaming mob with these guys? Great. Next time you can just skip to taking 2 gold and taking 1 damage and call it a day. Kind of fast forwarding through those experiences. I hope that's something that Threshold incorporates as an option so that players can deal with the grind or have a way to simulate the grind to get to the meat of the experience. Some people want a 50-hour board game. Others would rather have a 20-hour board game that is more focused on the highlights, and that those ratios are made up, to be clear. I don't know where this would be, but I'm just, the point is that some people, myself included, just prefer the highlights and do not prefer the repeated fights with the same enemies that don't meaningfully add to your progression in the board game. The last complaint I have is the nature of solo versus co-op, and again, I kind of have a specific request here. Having played this both cooperatively and solo, and I have not done more than 2 players, I would never want to do more than 2 players, I think that my preference for this, whether you're playing solo or cooperative, would be a mode that kind of combines the two. Because in this game, the way it works is you can just play a solo game, going on your solo quests, wandering around the board over here, popping into battle, dealing with the enemies, and all that's fine. What you miss out when you play it solo is, first of all, you miss out if you have a person, a friend, significant other, whoever you want to play it with. You can't do that if you're doing it solo. And then secondly, you miss out on the nature of those combined combats where you're able to have the dynamics of your character and my character, which does provide for more engaging combat. I like that aspect of the game. MMORPGs are able to deal with this because you are your own person, and then sure, you meet up with others whenever something happens, and you're able to get both the best of both worlds out of it. In this case, though, if you want to have that benefit of a cooperative experience, the downside of it is that when you're dealing with this overland map, it feels a little bit more separate and disparate and also not as smooth. What I personally would wish for, and I would wish for this whether I'm playing it cooperatively or whether I'm playing it two-handed solo. Either way, I would want this kind of option where the overland map, you kind of travel and operate as a group. You'd have to change some rules, but I think that, like, in the game, for me to go ahead and split off and I'm going to go do this fetch quest and you're going to go do this thing, I find it kind of separates the user experience, and it just adds this clutter of like, well, we have to meet up for that combat anyway because the game is scaled around 2 players. So yeah, sure, you can go do that and I'll go do the side thing and that's fine, but then we have to kind of constantly meet up, and it provides a degree of extra grind to the way you have to play cards and do things that, for me personally, I don't know if that necessarily adds as much to the experience. And I think you possibly could have the best of both worlds too. You possibly could have the ability to shift out while having rules for how you travel together. I think that I almost prefer the main overland map to be you travel as a party, you work as a party, which would also allow for when I'm playing a true solo, I can just move as a party and then being able to just deal with having 2 hands of cards and playing through 2 characters. Well, not, I guess not, true solo is not true solo. The game already has true solo. I mean being able to handle multiple characters while playing it solo as opposed to playing it as a group. So I almost wish there were some differences to how the solo versus cooperative were handled, either as an option or as just the way the game plays, because I like the dynamics of having a second character in combat. And again, I mean that whether I'm playing with somebody else or whether I'm playing it myself, but then every other part of the game, I kind of just wish I was just doing a single character and just managing that way. So overall, Threshold's in a place where I like a lot of the things that it's doing. The simplicity of the rule set relative to the sheer amount of feeling cool as you upgrade your character, that to me is the biggest draw. It does feel like it's doing a pretty decent job at capturing the MMORPG experience, but putting it into a tabletop form. But it has some drawbacks. Some of those drawbacks I think are just prototype drawbacks and hopefully will be resolved and or improved. And others are things based on the way an MMORPG in a tabletop form is trying to handle the experience, while trying to be possibly a bit too similar to an MMORPG in a way that doesn't necessarily enable as much fun in a board game. And those are things that I am less confident in whether they'll change or not, because, I mean, at the end of the day, that's just my opinion and my feedback. There are different people who are playing this game, and you might prefer it a certain way, so it's always, I don't know what will change. Overall, I enjoy Threshold. My overall final thoughts and whatnot. Final thoughts wise, I enjoy Threshold. I'm not going to give it a rating, but I'll give it a minimum rating. Minimum rating would be a 3.5 out of 5. That's where, like, because there's lots that I like, but there's things that get in the way of the experience. I easily think this could be higher than that. If some of these things were in a final game were cleared up, I could easily see it being a 4. I could possibly see it being a 4.5. I'm not quite as confident that. I think it would have to really be a much better experience overall, but I think it could easily be a 4 with a few small changes. Some of them might just be the prototype issues, because the core gameplay, the core satisfaction of what you're doing is very strong. It's just that there's a lot of other things that come in that package, and those are the things that would determine how often, how frequently, or if at all, this gets tabled. That's my first impressions review That's my first impressions of Threshold from Open Owl Studios. You can check out the campaign at the link down below. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you found this useful in some way, and as always, I hope you have a good one.